distribution.
In the last cabinet meeting, Finance Chief Sonny Dominguez tells President Duterte revenues of over ₱1 billion will be lost without fuel excise taxes and VAT. He adds that the expected revenue from fuel taxes have already been allocated, and non-collection will result in more borrowing or bigger debt.
Those expenditures are for our build, for the salaries of government employees, including soldiers, including policemen, including teachers. So that money has already been allocated.
Socioeconomic Chief Carl Chua also warns against increasing minimum fares and wages. He says this could do more harm than good, as it can bring about higher inflation.
We should be concerned not only for one sector or one type of worker. Dapat po lahat po ay concern po natin.
As for affected employees, the Labor Department is proposing to spend ₱24 billion to provide a 3-month subsidy. The agency says this should be provided from April to June to about 1 million beneficiaries. The Energy Department, meantime, backs a shorter work week.
We also support, Mr. Mayor, yung panukala na 4-day week work at saka yung panukala din po palawigin muna natin ang work from home para sa ganun po mabawasan ang pagbiyahe ng ating mga mamamayan.
Malacanang says these are still under consideration and the President has yet to decide on these proposals. AC Nichols, CNN Philippines.
A number of jeepney drivers and operators finally received the 6,000 peso fuel subsidy. Transport groups FEDJADAP and LTOP tell CNN Philippines the amount was credited to some of their members' Pantawid Pasada cards beginning yesterday, the day the government promised to begin payouts.
Hapon na po nung nag-isip po sila sa bangko, meron na naman po pumapasok mangilan-ilan. Sa Laguna po at Batangas, halos 50% plus na po yung nakatanggap. Sa La Union, medyo marami-rami na, at saka dito sa Pangasinan, sa Dagupan, at saka doon sa Ilocosur, mayroon na rin, at saka doon sa Baguio, mayroon na rin.
Of the 2.5 billion peso cash aid, a bulk or 1.75 billion pesos will go to those with government permits, including drivers of PUVs, taxis, and TNVS. Tricycle drivers will receive 625 million pesos and delivery service riders 125 million, but they will have to wait a little longer. The Interior Department has given local governments until March 19th to submit their list of tricycle drivers to be forwarded to the LTFRB. The regulator is also waiting for the list of delivery service riders from the Trade Department.
May pinila pa na kami, nagpasa na, hinintay lang namin.
Kung ano po ibibigay po sa amin, tatanggapin po namin ang bukas sa kalooban po namin yun.
Sana lahat makatanggap. Pwede pong bigyan kami ng discount sa gasolinahan po, ganun po. Makakatulong na po sa amin.
While other drivers are still waiting for their fuel subsidy, here is some welcome news. Energy officials and an oil industry source say Filipinos can expect a pump price rollback next week. Chrissy Di Matulak tells us by how much.
After 11 weeks of consecutive oil price hikes, relief may just be around the corner for public transport drivers. The Energy Department says a price rollback is most likely to happen soon.
Mas maganda kung bababa nila yung diesel kasi masyadong mahirapan yung mga driver eh. Saka wala na kami kinikita kasi sobrang taas ang diesel.
Sana ibalik nila yung dati, kasi dati lang 49 yan, yung naging 72 eh.
In an interview with CNN Philippines, the DOE said some events across the globe will likely cause a dip in crude oil prices. These include a reduced demand from China, and Ukraine stepping back from its plan to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, reducing tensions with Russia.
The price of crude oil is actually very volatile, but it had keep on increasing because of the sustained pronouncement from the US, UK, EU of the sanctions against Russia. But recently, there was a statement from the Ukrainian president that they're not interested anymore in actually joining the NATO, but notably in China, which actually imposed a massive lockdown. So those are really the two main this week.
In a cabinet meeting this week, Energy Secretary Alfonso Cusi said gasoline prices could drop by at least 5 pesos per liter, diesel by 12 pesos per liter. Prices of gasoline and diesel recently increased by more than 7 pesos and 13 pesos per liter, respectively. Transport groups have been taken to the streets calling for the suspension of the excise tax for fuel.
Definitely a price rollback is something that we anticipate and welcome. Pero sa dulo, itong price rollback na ito ay gaano ba ka-significant?
While the price rollback has yet to happen, drivers are hoping that for now, they will receive the subsidy promised by the government. They understand the need for more transportation options, which is why they don't want to give up on their operations as much as possible. Chrissy De Matulak, CNN Philippines.
Rising oil prices have another casualty, the airline industry. As our senior correspondent Lois Calderon reports, just when airliners are again about to take off, expensive jet fuel is throwing a wrench into their plans.
U.S. Navy retiree Brian McCann and Filipina Evelyn Bacho met on Facebook a year ago and fell in love long distance in the midst of a raging pandemic. As soon as the Philippines allowed foreign tourists to enter borders without quarantine in February, McCann flew in.
I came here to get married to my fiance here. We traveled to the Bohol region or the island. That's where she was from.
The couple has set their wedding for this year, but more expensive jet fuel could make plane tickets less affordable. McCann flies back to Boston, Massachusetts, and hopes to return to Manila in a few months.
Fuel prices, right? Did you mention something like that? Oh yeah, that's going to create a problem for me when I have to travel back here, back and forth to visit her. I'll try to find the best deal available, of course. Yeah, money-wise.
Flag carrier Philippine Airlines wants aviation regulators to review the fuel surcharge matrix amid rising global oil. PAL President Captain Stanley Nang says jet fuel accounts for about 50% of the airliner's operating expenses. The Civil Aeronautics Board has the power to issue a fuel surcharge matrix for domestic and international flights.
It's really a good time actually for airlines right now. Just except for the fuel price, of course, but we actually don't think that's going to stay up there for a long period of time. We're actually asking the help of CAB for our fuel surcharge, but of course it should be still reasonably priced for the consumers to actually not reasonable for them to fly still.
PAL has announced it's offering 5 million seats on sale for as low as $81 for return international flights as it celebrates its 81st year of operations. PAL earlier announced in January it has emerged from bankruptcy proceedings after a U.S. court approved its restructuring plan to slash debts by more than $2 billion. It's boosting its domestic flights to return to pre-pandemic level by April. It has also added more flights to Singapore, Australia, and Japan, while plans are underway to soon resume flights to Bali, Macau, and mainland China.
PAL has earned a new life, not just to live, but to thrive. The new PAL is smaller and streamlined to fit the new normal.
The tie that binds airlines and passengers is like a love story. Each one is the other's lifeline, so to speak, separated by the pandemic. So when borders reopened, both sides cheered. But rising jet fuel costs could spoil a happy ending. Lois Calderon, CNN Philippines.
More than 100 Filipino seafarers are still stranded in Ukraine as the war in Eastern Europe marks its third week. Tristan Odalo tells us authorities hope to speed up rescue efforts.
In the last few days, sirens and warnings have filled the air in a port near Odessa in Ukraine. A vessel carrying 12 Filipino crew members is currently docked there. But despite the chaos, the seafarers say they prefer to stay on board.
Yung naririnig lang namin is yung mga warning lang po. Tapos pag nag-warning po, biglang may siren, nag-iinto po yung mga operation dito lahat. Tapos parang nagtatago, parang umaalis sila dito sa Pantala. Tapos kami rin, Sabi rin ng opisina namin, pag may ganun, take shelter na rin kami, papasok din kami dito sa accommodation ng barko namin para po safety na rin po.
The Filipinos say they are far from the war zone, but if things get worse, they are ready to evacuate anytime.
Hindi naman po namin pwede abandonahin yung barko namin kasi mali naman po yung paggawin namin na abandonahin namin nang walang abiso ng opisina namin, pati yung principal po.
The Foreign Affairs Department is closely monitoring the plight of stranded seafarers in the Black Sea. Some 472 Filipino seafarers are affected by the Ukraine-Russia conflict, with around 150 of them still aboard their vessels.
Extracting them or evacuating them has become more difficult because of the ongoing fighting.
The DFA is also appealing to manning agencies and ship owners to cooperate in extracting the seafarers from their vessels.
Because the welfare and safety of our seafarers are their primary responsibility. That's why I would like to appeal to them to help out, and shoulder the cost of extracting or evacuating our seafarers.
Barring any changes or flight delays, the Department of Foreign Affairs aims to finish its repatriation of Filipinos who were evacuated from Ukraine to the Philippines this week. Tristan Nodalo, CNN Philippines.
Around 286 Filipinos have returned home from war-torn Ukraine. When we come back on Newsnight, we look at how some presidential hopefuls are reacting to the government's refusal to suspend the fuel excise tax despite rising pump prices. And former Senator Bongbong Marcos finally speaks up on the controversies hounding his candidacy. Among these, his family's or his late father's unpaid estate tax. Details after the break.
Conquering the universe was the ultimate, but there's more. Dahil tinawag ko ako ng Panginoon for a major purpose. To guide the youth, help communities, and to bring others closer to Him. Kaya I take care of my health through proper diet, exercise, and MX3 capsule. I am ready to serve. Kasi para sa Panginoon, hindi lang ako fourth runner-up. First place ako sa puso niya.
Mahalagang paalala, ang MX3 capsule ay hindi gamot at hindi dapat gamiting panggamot sa anumang uri ng sakit.
Welcome back. Again, our top story, the government will retain the fuel excise tax despite rising oil prices. President Duterte also approved his economic team's recommendation to provide monthly unconditional cash transfers of 200 pesos to poor families for a year. As George Quiles tells us, at least one presidential candidate is against these measures.
For Panfilo Lacson, the administration should reconsider maintaining fuel excise tax. Lacson says he recognizes possible revenue losses in suspending the tax, but adds the public needs immediate relief from skyrocketing fuel prices. He adds the government can do more than just provide a monthly cash assistance to poor families.
Hindi naman natin sasabing pag suspend forever or suspended forever. Ang sinasabi natin, temporary. Kung ilang months itong nangyayaring walang tigil ang taas, pwede naman taasan yung threshold. Yun ang aming recommendation. Against 200 per month, napakaliit. Hindi kakayanin yun. Hindi makakasapat.
On the other hand, Bongbong Marcos agrees with keeping the fuel excise tax. He even proposes the return of a general fuel subsidy carried out during the term of his late father, the Oil Price Stabilization Fund.
Kung bumibili tayo ng langis, ng isang, whatever the price is, $100, whatever it is then some of that increase will be covered by the oil subsidy. So that kung may increase man na umabot pa sa tao, ay maliit na lang. at dahan-dahanin natin. At yun ang palagay ko support at mararamdaman niya ng lahat ng tao, hindi lamang yung nakalista dun sa ayuda, sa IX or whatever. That's my thinking there.
In the meantime, Faisal Mangondato calls for a once-a-week private car holiday.
Maganda po yung isang araw na walang lalabas na sasakyan ng mga pribadong mga Pilipino. Yan po dapat magkaroon tayo kung tayo ay totoo na mayroon tayong disiplina sa ating sarili at mayroon tayong spiritual formation bawat isang tao.
George Cahiles, CNN Philippines.
Presidential candidate Bongbong Marcos is leaving the issue of his family's the issue of his late father's estate tax that the family needs to settle up to lawyers, but not without saying, quote, there is plenty of fake news involved. Now that's after the political party of Isko Moreno brought up the controversy, Rex Remigio reports.
Bongbong Marcos has not granted interviews with the media before or after his campaign activities recently. But in a turnaround, the presidential candidate discusses in an online media forum a number of issues facing him, including his family's unsettled estate taxes worth more than 200 billion pesos.
Well, there's a lot of fake news involved there. Let's leave it to the lawyers to discuss it. Because the so-called facts that they quote are not facts at all. They are just presumption there.
While calling the tax information as presumptions, Marcos at the same time says he is not familiar with his cases. He adds he will follow the court decision. In 1997, the Supreme Court ruled that the Marcos family must settle unpaid estate taxes. Hours after Marcos's appearance in the forum, the Acción Democrático Party of another presidential candidate, Isko Moreno, shows a letter supposedly from the Bureau of Internal Revenue. The BIR said it sent a written demand to the Marcoses in December 2021 regarding their tax liabilities.
We have received a copy of a letter of Commissioner Dulay ng BIR na sinulatan sila noong December 2, 2021 na sinisingil na ng buwis ang pamilya Marcos sapagkat ito raw ay marapat lamang na mapunta na sa gobyerno. Now, if that is the case, this is a very good asset. Malaking pera ito, 200 billion na pwede natin ipang-ayuda sa tao.
CNN Philippines is trying to get the Marcos camp's response to the letter shown by Acción Democrático. Rex Renitio, CNN Philippines.
The Commission on Elections is set to look into the reported distribution of cash envelopes during the campaign of Bongbong Marcos and Sara Duterte in Nueva Ecija yesterday. COMELEC Commissioner George Garcia said he would bring up the issue where supporters reportedly received 500 pesos after the campaign rally outside the governor's residence in the town of Santa Rosa. Some supporters say they did not know where these envelopes came from and for what purpose. Marcos's party, the Partido Federal, says it will check what happened and that it rejects vote buying. The spokesperson of Vice President Leni Robredo says she will be thankful if President Duterte openly endorses her as his successor. That is, if the endorsement is not a transactional agreement.
In other words, it's not an endorsement in exchange for something else. It's not to say that she will actively seek it or court the endorsement. But if it's given freely, then she will be thankful for it. Obviously, this is an election, and in an election, if somebody comes forward and says, "I'm going to support you," then the response is "Thank you," and move on.
Still on the elections, COMELEC grants the request of Robredo's lead counsel to conduct a random sampling of ballots for the May polls. The 7-member en banc has agreed to let political parties and representatives of candidates pull 3 to 5 ballots meant for each city or municipality, following the plea of election lawyer Romulo Macalintal. Process is scheduled for next week.
Yan po ay mga reasonable na pakiusap at dapat po ay pinagbibigyan upang maging transparent, maging accountable ang lahat ng ginagawa natin dito. Kinakailangan makita natin na yung mga produkto na ginagawa natin dito, mga balota, ay sadyang tama, sadyang magagamit natin sa araw na eleksyon at sadyang bagay doon sa ating mga vote counting machines.
Comlic also gave a walkthrough of the ballot printing process Tuesday as groups criticized the poll body for supposed lack of transparency. Billions of pesos worth of illegal drugs were seized in an operation in Infanta, Quezon. Authorities intercepted 3 vans at a checkpoint along Barangay Comon on Tuesday morning, carrying about 10 billion pesos worth of shabu. Now, that's equivalent to 80 sacks, or about 1,650 kilograms of the illegal drug. 10 suspects were arrested. More stories coming up. The Philippines Miss World bet sends some love to her supporters a day before competing for the coveted crown, while global superstar BTS is taking center stage again for the 64th Grammy Award. Stay tuned.
Samsung is breaking the boundaries of home entertainment. Introducing the Freestyle, Samsung's all-new portable screen. It's a projector, a smart TV, and a speaker all rolled into one. Enjoy a unique big screen experience wherever you want, whenever you want. Pre-order now until April 17 to get premium freebies.
Protect yourself and your loved ones from COVID-19 by following health and safety protocols. Eat a well-balanced diet and drink plenty of water. Get 7 to 8 hours of sleep and exercise at least 30 minutes each day. And as restrictions start to slowly ease up, don't forget that COVID-19 is still very much around. Wear your mask and face shield. Practice proper social distancing and wash your hands frequently. While these vital tips won't eliminate the risk completely, they'll significantly reduce them.
Welcome back. The Alaska Aces lived to fight another day in their final PBA conference after beating the NLEX Road Warriors 93-79. It was a rocky start for the Aces in their quarterfinal match, but they caught the lead in the second quarter. Alaska is vying for a playoff spot to eventually grab their last PBA championship with the Governor's Cup. Last month, Alaska announced that this will be their last season after almost 4 decades. We have less than 2 months until the Southeast Asian Games. Pauline Versosa tells us how the country's top spikers in beach and indoor volleyball will prepare overseas.
Intensive training camps set in different parts of the globe await the country's national volleyball teams as they gear up for the 31st Southeast Asian Games. This time, the Philippine squads will be setting up camp outside the usual Asian borders. As early as Tuesday, the men's and women's beach volleyball teams, led by 2019 SEA Games bronze medalists Cici Rondina and Bernadette Ponce, left for Brisbane, where they will get a chance to train and compete with Australian nationals.
Sobrang excited po kami sa magiging training po namin doon. And I know na sobrang dami po namin matututunan doon at babaunin po namin yun para sa SEA Games and gagawin talaga namin yung best po namin.
On March 20, the men's indoor volleyball team will fly to Qatar for a 2-week training camp that will run until April 5, with the squad eyeing to eclipse their historic silver medal finish during the 30th edition of the SEA Games held on home soil.
Kung ano man yung naging kulang namin noong 2019, magandang experience tong papunta namin ng Qatar dahil I think makakatulong yun to improve the team and yung chemistry.
3 days after the 2022 PVL Open Conference comes to a close, the women's indoor team will set up camp in Brazil beginning April 12th. Bannered by key returnees Alyssa Valdez, Jaja Santiago, and Abby Maraño, the 16-woman pool will look to improve on their 4th place finish in 2019.
This foreign training is so of paramount importance because it gives us a lot of exposure. And I'm trying to bring our teams towards on the other side of the globe, to Europe and South America. Enough of Asia. We have a lot of experience already in Japan, Thailand, Korea, China. Our target is really to have a medal. Not even to have a medal, is to get the gold medals in the 4 teams.
The 31st Southeast Asian Games will run from May 12 to 23 in Hanoi, Vietnam. Pauline Verzosa, CNN Philippines.
But missing from the lineup of indoor volleyball players are notable athletes like Kim Dee, Kale Mao, Gia Morado, Jasmine Nabor, and Dindin Manabat. They declined invitations to join the national team. Entertainment news now. Before tomorrow's Miss World pageant, Tracy Maureen Perez made sure to show some love and gratitude to supporters. The country's representative thanked fans online, calling those who continue to believe in her rare gems. Tracy also showed off an elegant gown designed by Francis Libiran. Find out if the Philippines will win its second Miss World crown. The pageant airs tomorrow at 8:30 in the morning, live from Puerto Rico, with a pre-pageant special at 8 a.m. with our senior anchor Pinky Webb, only here on CNN Philippines.
Happening in Puerto Rico. Catch the coronation night here on CNN Philippines.
Updates now in music. K-pop sensation BTS is performing on the Grammy stage for the first time in person. The group is among the featured artists for the April 3 event in Las Vegas. BTS members are also attending as nominees, up for Best Pop Duo/Group Performance for their hit Butter. They first sang for the Grammys last year through a pre-taped video in Seoul because of COVID restrictions. And Ed Sheeran adds more stops for his Mathematics tour. The chart-topping artist will head to Australia and New Zealand from February to March next year. As for shows in Asia, the Shape of You singer has said these could be set for the end of 2023. And that is it for now. Join me again on News.ph at 7 p.m. I'm Pia Ontiveros for Newsnight, where we go above and beyond the headlines.
This program is brought to you by...
I think it's very important to...
RPN Regional AM radio stations nationwide welcomes CNN Philippines, a first on radio. To bring you the latest news you can use, news you can trust. Listen to Newsnight, weekdays, 6 p.m.
We now go above and beyond the headlines.
Followed by Med Talk, Health Talk.
We'll talk about how to keep ourselves healthy during the pandemic.
Politics as usual.
Our guests for tonight, two political science professors.
Up close and more. Catch CNN Philippines Hour in all RPN AM radio stations. Weekdays, 6 to 7 p.m.
Sedentary living due to pandemic restrictions is leading to lifestyle diseases. For instance, people working from home are becoming less physically active and binging more on snacks that are higher in salt, fat, and unwanted sugar. One common condition resulting from these behaviors is hypertension, and one of the most dangerous and also one of the conditions. That is why it's called the silent killer, but it doesn't have to be. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and we'll bring you the knowledge and care you need, especially in this time of COVID-19. You're watching Med Talk Health Talk on CNN Philippines. Watching your blood pressure is important because your arteries carry blood from your heart to other parts of the body. Our guests today will talk about this topic and share their knowledge. Let's welcome Dr. Eduardo Yambao Jr. He's a cardiologist from the Asian Hospital and Medical Center. Also with us is Dr. Romel Punong Bayan, who is an internal medicine and hypertension specialist from the Medical City Clark and Bulacan Medical Center. Most of the time, hypertension has no obvious symptoms to indicate that something is wrong. One thing you can do to protect yourself is by checking your blood pressure. In a blood pressure reading, there are two numbers, itong systolic and the diastolic. I'll start the conversation with Doc Ome. Please explain what this means and ano ba yung normal BP range na dapat makita natin?
The normal BP that we have to really attain is 120/80 and below. However, the technique of taking your blood pressure is really crucial. So if you do your blood pressure taking in a public place, probably you can have an inaccurate blood pressure reading. But in general, we have to really make sure that we are taking the blood pressure the right. So it has to be quiet, you have to be seated comfortably with your back support, your feet are flat on the floor, and your measuring device, it should be in the level of your heart. So however, most of the cases, I'm seeing a lot of technical errors. So it's really very crucial to take your blood pressure properly.
Now, a hypertensive crisis means that there's a severe increase in blood pressure, and one of the risk factors for this is a stroke. When this happens, the heart may not be able to pump blood properly. Dr. Ed, if one notices a spike in their BP, biglang pagtaas, what should their initial reaction be?
When there is a sudden spike in blood pressure, they should first check, number one, if they are into certain stressors which could cause elevated blood pressure. This would include probably they are in certain activities like exercise, or they're really shouty or laughter, or they may have a recent intake of food that may elevate your blood pressure, like salty food or foods high in fat or caffeinated drinks. After ruling this out, they have to also make sure that they properly took their medications. But if the blood pressure is still on the high side, then they might need to immediately sought consult with their attending doctor, or if it doesn't really go down, they should go to the emergency room.
Now, hypertension is one of the leading causes of illness and of premature death here in the Philippines. The usual suspects that may cause this are the food we eat. In the Philippines, we love to eat fatty and oily food such as adobo and sisig, which can contribute to an increase in someone's blood pressure. Dr. Ome, aside from a person's diet, what are some of the risk factors for hypertension?
Actually, the more common really risk factor for hypertension is number one, genetics. Then the more popular ones are alcohol intake, smoking, being sedentary or doesn't have any physical activity. Even obesity and diabetes mellitus are the more common risk factors for hypertension.
We already know that smoking is bad for our lungs, but it also increases our risk for heart disease as well as hypertension. Dr. Ed, explain naman natin yun. How does this happen naman? Why is smoking always the culprit sa lahat ng mga masamang bagay sa katawan?
Nicotine in the cigarette can cause the blood vessels or the tubes that carries blood in the body to weaken, or they become narrow also. The nicotine also leads to faster heartbeat, and this all leads to an elevated blood pressure. That's why if we will quit smoking, the blood vessels will improve, the blood pressure decreases, and the risk for heart disease or heart attack will also decrease.
Now, aside from smoking, drinking too much alcohol can also increase our blood pressure to unhealthy levels. Having more than 3 drinks temporarily increases the blood pressure, but repeated binge drinking can lead to long-term increases. How does alcohol affect someone's blood pressure?
When a person drinks alcohol, so usually the heart rate increases because it excites our body. And with the increasing heart rate, there would be a concomitant increase in blood pressure. And if there would be a constant exposure to this increase in heart rate, then patient would eventually have long-term hypertension and would not just be a situational increase in blood pressure.
Earlier, you mentioned that one of the really significant factors sa hypertension ay ang genetics or napagmamanahan nito. Now, if someone has a strong familial line of hypertensive parents, grandparents, whatnot, what can they do about this?
Since the genes are unmodifiable, so we cannot modify the genes, what we can do is just to delay the onset of your hypertension. So there have been a lot of genes related to hypertension, and definitely 30 to 60% of hypertensives are still the hereditary ones, the inherited ones. We call it the primary or the essential hypertension. So technically, what we can do is just to delay by modifying our lifestyle.
Now, people with high blood pressure puts themselves at higher risk for COVID-19 due to their weaker immune system. Doc Jome, what can people with hypertension do to protect themselves from coronavirus, since it's still with us up to now?
Hypertension will, with the implication of your ACE2 receptors and the abnormalities in your renin-angiotensin system and some other receptors like your toll-like receptors, which is responsible for inflammation. Hypertensive patients are really at risk for acquiring the COVID virus. So what they can do is to just continue their medication so that their blood pressure is within normal levels. Probably it will lower the risk for them to acquire the infection.
Doc Jome, as a follow-up to that, with regards to vaccinations, there's been a lot of conflict, especially when it comes to the vaccination sites. Hindi pumapasa yung mga hypertensives dahil mataas ang BP nila, either hindi nila nakukuha yung booster nila or vaccination nila. What is the current guidelines now? Ano bang dapat alalahanin ng mga hypertensives whenever they get their vaccine or their booster?
They have been instructed to continue their hypertension medications before going to the vaccination site because, Filipinos are really needle phobic. So when they go to a vaccination place, there's an increased stress. So the tendency is for them to elevate their blood pressure. So the better thing to do is before going to the vaccination site, make sure that you take your regular antihypertensive medication.
Now, when left undetected, hypertension can cause a number of problems. When we return, we'll talk about the complications of hypertension. We're your connection to healthcare. You're watching MedTalk Health Talk. High blood pressure can silently damage the body for years before showing any symptoms. Uncontrolled high blood pressure can cause disabilities, poor quality of life, or even a heart attack. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and you're watching MedTalk Health Talk. We're together in health. The excessive pressure on your artery walls caused by high blood pressure can damage your blood vessels as well as other organs. Now, the higher the blood pressure and the longer it goes uncontrolled, the greater the damage here. Now, Dr. Ed, what are the most common complications that are caused by consistently elevated, uncontrolled high blood pressure?
There are a lot of complications from uncontrolled high blood pressure. This includes heart attack or stroke, heart failure or inability of the heart to adequately supply oxygen throughout the body. Aneurysm can also arise, which means there is weakening and bulging in the walls of the blood vessels. Patients can also have eye problems like blurring of vision, bleeding in the eyes, or double vision. And long-term, uncontrolled high blood pressure can eventually also damage the kidneys.
Healthy arteries are flexible, they're strong, they're elastic, and their inner lining is smooth so that blood flows freely to supply vital organs and tissues with nutrients as well as oxygen. Now, hypertension gradually increases the pressure of blood flowing through those arteries. Dr. Ed, when it comes to our arteries, a lot of our viewers are familiar with cholesterol and its effects on the heart. What is the relation with this with elevated high blood pressure?
If there is elevated high blood pressure, the arteries in the heart and the rest of the body becomes less elastic. And when they become less elastic, they cannot function well, which is they cannot supply the adequate oxygen and nutrients. Because of this, heart disease can eventually happen. That's why in prolonged and uncontrolled hypertension, patient can have heart failure, or they could also have ischemic heart disease, or the heart muscle not having adequate oxygen, or eventually they could have heart enlargement. And they would feel shortness of breath, they could experience chest pain, or they get tired easily when this happens.
Now, elevated blood pressure, as explained, can cause many heart problems such as coronary artery disease, enlarged left heart, as well as heart failure, as Dr. Ed mentioned. But Dr. Ed, nowadays we associate all of these elevated blood pressure with a certain body type, with diet, too much cholesterol in the diet, too much unhealthy eating or whatnot. But is that the case nowadays? Meron bang itsura ang isang hypertensive? Or can someone look healthy outside but still be hypertensive?
A person can look normal outside, like for example, being on the normal weight, normal build, but can still be hypertensive. And because genetics, as what Dr. Punong-Bayan also mentioned, do play a big role in high blood pressure. This brings to the importance of having a regular follow-up and regular monitoring of blood pressure. And other factors like food, obesity could just factor in or further aggravate a person with genetically predisposed condition to develop hypertension.
Now, hypertension can also damage the brain because our brain depends on a nourishing blood supply to work properly. Dr. Ome, can you talk more about high blood pressure and its relation or its risks sa ating brain?
Actually, when we talk about hypertension and brain, we are talking more of the complications of hypertension, which is stroke. And it's around less than 50% of the time, hypertension is the cause of stroke. So this can lead to morbidity, like paralysis or poor quality of life, and some even die because of a certain fatal stroke due to hypertension.
Kidneys filter excess fluid and waste from the blood, a process that requires healthy blood vessels. Now, high blood pressure can damage those blood vessels, as we learned earlier, in and leading towards the kidneys. Dr. Ome, explain natin yon, yung link naman with hypertension and paano na-apektuhan ng ating kidneys.
Hypertensive patients has elevated sympathetic tone and endothelial dysfunction. There is also water retention and salt retention. Eventually, will destroy the blood vessels of the kidney. And this will lead, at worst, they go to dialysis.
Let's talk about the eyes, because hypertension can also damage the blood vessels that supply blood to the eyes. And this can cause retinopathy, choroidopathy, or even optic neuropathies. Dr. Ome, pag-usapan naman natin yon, yung link of hypertension tsaka sa mata.
Because when you are hypertensive, your blood vessels in the eyes, specifically at the retina, will have some abnormal changes. There will be thickening of your intima, and there will be increased degeneration of the hyalin of the blood vessels of your eyes. Eventually, this will lead into poor circulation, and eventually, this will even cause blindness.
Okay. Now that we know what hypertension can lead to, it's important that we know how to lower it and stay healthy. Your health is our mission. This is MedTalk Health Talk. If you've been diagnosed with hypertension, you might think about taking medications to bring your numbers down. But lifestyle plays an important role in lowering your blood pressure as well. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and you're watching MedTalk Health Talk, where your care always comes first. If you successfully control your blood pressure with a healthy lifestyle, you might avoid, delay, or even reduce the need for medications. Dr. Ome, what lifestyle changes should one make to lower their blood pressure?
Diet and lifestyle really has a great impact on the blood pressure. So we have to have a regular exercise, not being sedentary. So at least it's more of most days of the week, at least 30 minutes moderate intensity cardio or aerobic exercise. And definitely we should have a good diet. Specifically, we call a good diet DASH diet approach to stop hypertension. This is composed of whole grains, vegetables and fruit, less of saturated fat and trans fat, high in potassium, and definitely low in sodium. This is a great way to lower your blood pressure as much as 10 millimeters mercury on your systolic blood pressure.
Having high blood pressure typically shows no symptoms, which is why it is important to have yourself checked regularly by a medical expert. But home monitoring can also help you keep tabs on your blood pressure and if certain lifestyle changes are working. Now, make sure to talk to your doctor before you buy a gadget for home monitoring of your blood pressure. Dr. Ed, how can we properly check our BP at home? Let's start first with ano ba yung maganda to have at home? Anong klaseng gadget? We have electronic ones, we have the manual ones, we have the wrist ones even nowadays. What is your recommendation?
For home BP monitoring, since usually it's the person himself will check his blood pressure, it is ideal that he use an electronic or digital BP monitor. It could either be a wrist digital monitor or the arm digital monitor, and make sure it's properly charged or it has an adequate battery so that it could function well. Then he should find a right place, a quiet place where he is relaxed, and then sit down and make sure that there's no tight-fitting clothes affecting the arm where the BP cuff will be placed. After which, place the arm just at the level of the heart and the blood pressure cuff above the elbow.
Okay.
Then the person should keep still and quiet while the machine is taking the blood pressure. Then after taking the measurement, he could take another 2 or 3 readings, then compare it. And ideally, the person should also record the blood pressure measurement so that he could show the readings to his doctor on follow-up.
Now, Dr. Ome, nowadays with technology, there are a lot of gadgets that help with monitoring one's blood pressure. Even watches can do it nowadays. But how accurate are these? Are these something that gives as accurate an information as those as what hypertension specialists or cardiologists use in their clinic?
Actually, most of the wearables, we call it the wearables, are still in the process of validation. Some of the gadgets can monitor your heart rate, can monitor the calories burned. But regarding the blood pressure, I'll still recommend those machines that has been mentioned by Dr. Ed. So these are more accurate because they are validated already. And fitness trackers are just probably an adjunct to the risk factors, like if you do exercise, how many calories do you burn, what is your target heart rate. Probably this is the practical usability of your tracker to track your physical activity and your parameters while doing some interventions to alleviate your high blood pressure.
Now, this discussion was indeed very helpful. And with that, I'd like to thank cardiologist Dr. Eduardo Yambao Jr. and hypertension specialist Dr. Romel Punong Bayan for sharing your expertise with all of us today. Hypertension may be the silent killer, but it can often be prevented or reduced by eating healthy, maintaining proper weight, regular exercise, and not smoking. We want to be your partner for a lifetime of good health. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and this is MedTalk Health Talk on CNN Philippines. We'll see you next time.
RPN Regional AM radio stations nationwide welcomes CNN Philippines, a first on radio.